The charges are that Caitlin and I pocketed $1.3 million, and I just want to come out and say that those charges are true.
January 2024. A pastor uploads a confession video. Not asking for forgiveness, but blaming God for his crimes.
We took God at his word and sold a cryptocurrency with no clear exit.
Meet Eli Regalado, online preacher who sold his Christian followers $3.2 million worth of divine cryptocurrency called Indxcoin. But wait, it gets worse. The coin was completely worthless. No blockchain, no technology, just a made-up number on a website. While his followers lost their life savings, Eli and his wife Caitlin bought jewelry, got cosmetic dentistry, took luxury vacations, and here's the kicker, remodeled their home. All because the Lord told them to.
Out of that 1.3, $500,000 went to the IRS, and a few $100,000 went to a home remodel that the Lord told us to do.
So when 300 Christians lost everything they'd trusted him with, was Eli Regalado a man of God gone wrong? Or just a really good liar with a Bible? Before Eli Regalado was selling cryptocurrencies to Christians, he was selling everything else to everyone else. Marketing consulting, business development, entrepreneurial coaching, the whole Silicon Valley starter pack. Except it wasn't working. By most accounts, Eli was what you'd politely call between successes when he discovered something that would change everything. God sells better than growth hacking. Enter Caitlin, his wife and soon-to-be business partner in the most literal sense. Together they pivoted from failed entrepreneurs to faith-based influencers, launching Victorious Grace Church, not a building with pews and stained glass, but a digital empire built on live streams, Instagram posts, and the kind of prosperity theology that makes poverty feel like a personal failure. The Regalados rebranded religion as a business opportunity. Their sermons weren't just about spiritual growth. They were about kingdom wealth and God-led investments. They spoke the language of venture capital with biblical citations. Portfolio diversification became spiritual wisdom. Risk management became trusting in the Lord's plan. This wasn't accidental. In the world of affinity fraud, trust isn't something you build. It's something you inherit. When you share someone's faith, their political beliefs, their cultural identity, the due diligence phase gets shortened to, well, they believe what I believe, so they must be good people. The Regalados understood this instinctively. They weren't just selling to Christians. They were selling as Christians, which meant every question about their business became indirectly a question about faith itself. The genius was in the positioning. Traditional pastors ask for tithes and offerings, money you give away and never see again, in exchange for spiritual benefits that can't be measured. But the Regalados offered something revolutionary, a way to serve God and get rich doing it. They turned charity into investment, faith into finance. Why give your money to the church when you could give it to God's cryptocurrency and watch it multiply? It was Christianity meets capitalism, with all the regulatory oversight of a Sunday service and all the financial sophistication of a Twitter thread about blockchain technology. Which is to say, none. Indxcoin wasn't just marketed as another cryptocurrency. It was positioned as kingdom wealth, a digital currency ordained by divine revelation and backed by the full faith and credit of the Almighty. The pitch was pretty simple here. Traditional cryptocurrencies were created by secular technologists with secular goals. But Indxcoin was different. This was God's cryptocurrency, designed for Christians, by Christians, with profits blessed by the highest authority of all. While Bitcoin had its blockchain, Ethereum had its smart contracts, and Dogecoin had its memes. Indxcoin had something more powerful: prayer. The Regalados weren't worried about hash rates or mining difficulty or market liquidity. They had something better than technical documentation. They had testimony. According to Colorado investigators, it was essentially worthless. A digital coin with no real blockchain infrastructure, no secondary market, and no way for investors to actually sell their holdings. It wasn't listed on any legitimate cryptocurrency exchange. You couldn't trade it, couldn't transfer it to other wallets, or use it to buy anything. It was, in every technical sense, not actually cryptocurrency at all. Regalado took advantage of the trust and faith of his own Christian community and peddled outlandish promises of wealth to them when he sold them essentially worthless cryptocurrencies, said by Securities Commissioner for Colorado. But that didn't matter, because the Regalados had created something more valuable than a functional product. They'd created a closed-loop system where questioning the product meant questioning God's plan. When early investors asked why they couldn't sell their Indxcoin on popular exchanges like Coinbase or Binance, the answer was theological, not technical. God wanted his people to buy directly from his chosen vessels, the Regalados themselves. This is economic manipulation at its most elegant. Traditional Ponzi schemes collapse when new investor money can't keep pace with redemption requests. But the Regalados had eliminated redemptions entirely by making them spiritually inappropriate. Selling your Indxcoin was a crisis of faith. The Kingdom Wealth Exchange, their proprietary trading platform, was less like a cryptocurrency exchange and more like a digital collection plate. Money went in, hope came out, but the coins themselves remained safely in the Regalados' control. It was brilliant in its simplicity. They'd created a cryptocurrency that couldn't be sold, traded, or transferred, which meant they never had to worry about market crashes, regulatory scrutiny, or investor withdrawals. They essentially invented digital scrip, the kind of company currency that coal mines use to pay workers. Except instead of being redeemable at the company store, Indxcoin was redeemable in heaven. Which, as business models go, has excellent profit margins and no customer service department. The genius of the Regalados operation was in the sales process. Traditional investment schemes have to convince strangers to trust them with money, which requires building credibility, providing documentation, and answering difficult questions about risk and return. But when your sales floor is a sanctuary and your prospects are your congregation, the pitch becomes a prayer. Eli's live-streamed sermons became something unprecedented in the history of religious broadcasting. Prophetic sales calls. He would stand in front of his camera, eyes closed, channeling divine revelation about who in his audience was supposed to invest and how much. The psychological manipulation was surgical in its precision. Traditional high-pressure sales tactics rely on creating urgency or scarcity. This deal expires at midnight, or only 3 spots left. But the Regalados had weaponized something far more powerful: eternal consequences. Missing out on Indxcoin was a spiritual failure that could affect your relationship with God. People emptied retirement accounts, liquidated savings, borrowed against home equity. And when family members or financial advisors raised concerns, those objections were reframed as spiritual warfare. Satan trying to prevent God's people from accessing kingdom wealth. Let me get to the best part. When early investors couldn't sell their coins or access their profits, it wasn't evidence of fraud. It was evidence that their faith wasn't strong enough yet. Come on! This is what happens when spiritual authority meets financial desperation. The Regalados hadn't just identified a market opportunity. They'd created a captive market where customer complaints could be dismissed as moral failings and product failures could be reframed as character tests. They'd turned faith into a hedge fund with no redemption rights and prayer as the only customer service department. From June 2022 to April 2023, Indxcoin raised nearly $3.2 million from more than 300 individuals, according to Colorado securities investigators. For a cryptocurrency with no functional blockchain, no market presence, and no legitimate exchange listings, that's an impressive sales record. The question is, where did all that kingdom wealth actually go? The answer, documented in meticulous detail by state regulators, reads like a prosperity theology fever dream. The Regalados used around $1.3 million of the investment funds to bankroll lavish expenditures, including a Range Rover, jewelry, cosmetic dentistry, and extravagant vacations. When confronted with evidence of where the money went, Eli's response wasn't denial. It was doubling down on divine justification.
Took God at his word and sold a cryptocurrency with no clear exit. We did. So what we're praying for and what we're believing for still is that God is going to do a miracle.
This is gaslighting elevated to an art form. Traditional financial fraud requires elaborate cover-ups, falsified documents, and complex money laundering schemes to hide where investor funds actually went. But the Regalados had found something more effective than deception. They'd made transparency spiritually irrelevant. It didn't matter where the money went, because questioning their spending meant questioning God's judgment. It's fraud with a twist. Instead of promising investors they'd get rich, the Regalados had convinced them that making the Regalados rich was somehow part of God's plan for everyone involved. By January 2024, Colorado securities regulators had seen enough. Eli Regalado, his wife, and his 3 companies were charged with securities fraud, unlicensed broker-dealer activity, selling unregistered securities, and imposition of constructive trust. State regulators froze the bank accounts of the Denver pastor and his wife, who had admitted selling millions of dollars in worthless cryptocurrency. But somehow, Eli interpreted this as just another opportunity for ministry. As we've seen the video today, he acknowledged taking the money, confirmed spending it on personal expenses, and then asked for more donations in the name of miracle, all while maintaining that God had personally endorsed every financial decision. The video itself deserves its own psychological case study. Most fraud defendants tried to minimize their involvement, claim misunderstanding, or express remorse for any harm caused. Eli took the opposite approach: full confession, zero contrition, and a request for continued financial support. It was like a criminal defense strategy designed by someone who'd never heard of criminal defense. But the truly surreal part came later. Instead of attending his court hearing, Regalado was in Zambia promoting his cryptocurrency at a church conference, apparently unbothered by the minor inconvenience of having his assets frozen and his business model declared fraudulent. Apart from being legally incompetent, this is strategic brilliance. The charges in Colorado only mattered if you accepted Colorado's authority over God's financial system. And since Eli had positioned himself as the intermediary between divine revelation and cryptocurrency investment, earthly courts were just another form of spiritual persecution. By September 2024, Eli remained adamant that he had done nothing wrong, that his accusers were crooks, and that his crypto would soon be coveted. He wasn't just defending his innocence, he was defending his divine mandate to separate Christians from their savings. And without enforcement mechanisms that could touch his spiritual authority, the grift could continue indefinitely, just with different venues and new audiences. The Colorado case wasn't the end of the Indxcoin story. It was just the first season finale. Here's what makes the Regalado case different from every other cryptocurrency fraud you've heard about. The cryptocurrency? Never the point. Indxcoin was just the delivery mechanism for something far more valuable: the systematic monetization of religious trust. The Regalados skipped all the traditional crypto scams that rely on technical complexity to confuse investors. They didn't need to understand cryptocurrency technology because they found something more powerful than code. They'd found a community where questioning the leader's financial decisions was considered a spiritual problem. This is asymmetric trust at its most dangerous. The Regalados had all the authority and none of the accountability. They could make claims about divine revelation that couldn't be fact-checked, promise returns that couldn't be verified, and explain failures that couldn't be questioned without risking spiritual consequences. They created a closed system where feedback was filtered through religious hierarchy, and dissent was reframed as disobedience. The cryptocurrency was just the bait here. The real trap was the social and spiritual consequences of admitting you'd been deceived. Once someone had invested their retirement savings in God's cryptocurrency, accepting that it was worthless meant accepting that their spiritual discernment was flawed. Their pastor was a fraud, and their church community was built on lies. For many people, it's psychologically easier to lose money than to lose faith. This explains why the Regalados could continue fundraising even after being charged with fraud. As of July 2025, the state was seeking $3.4 million from the crypto founding pastor in civil proceedings. But by then, the real damage had already been done. Not just the financial damage, though $3 million extracted from working families is certainly huge, but the deeper damage to the entire concept of religious authority in financial matters. The Regalados had discovered the perfect storm conditions for fraud. A community built on trust, a leader positioned as divinely inspired, and a product complex enough to excuse failures while simple enough to attract investment. They didn't need venture capital, regulatory approval, or technological innovation. They just needed a pulpit and a live stream. It's really disturbing how easily the Regalados were able to do it. They didn't hack any systems, forge any documents, or break into any banks. They simply asked for money, claimed God told them to ask, and waited for the donations to arrive. The entire fraud was conducted in broad daylight, broadcast live, with victims who defended their participation even after learning they'd been defrauded. God didn't ask for $3.2 million. Eli Regalado did. But he asked so convincingly, with such spiritual authority and such confident promises of divine endorsement, that hundreds of people couldn't tell the difference. And when faith comes without receipts, salvation becomes the perfect product. Infinitely valuable, impossible to verify, and guaranteed to keep customers coming back for more. The Regalados may have lost their court case, but they won something more valuable. They proved that in an age of digital churches and online communities, religious authority can be monetized more efficiently than ever before. All you need is a camera, a compelling story, and the audacity to charge admission to heaven. The only question now is how many other pastors were taking notes.